A lesser-known detail about the history of Humongous Entertainment to casual fans of the company is that Putt-Putt, Freddy Fish, Pajama Sam, and Spy Fox weren't the only computer games that Humongous Entertainment had produced during its years of operation. Au contraire, in fact there were several different smaller properties released over the years that never carried on to that level of success that the mainline junior adventure titles had achieved, ranging from Fatty Bear to the Big Thinkers series. Whether these games were attempts to branch out into new genres of gameplay or appeal to a newer audience in an attempt to grow the company's fan base, one thing is clear. Many of them certainly differ from the standard formula one would come to expect from your typical Humongous Entertainment computer game. The intent of this video is to provide some dedicated time to all of them, exploring the various ins and outs of each, and possibly elaborate on why I think many of them didn't live up to the standards or reception of the 5 big Humongous IPs. This video serves as a miscellaneous compilation of sorts, covering every non-junior adventure and junior arcade game that was ever released by the company between the years of 1992 and 2003. And as a side note, no, I haven't forgotten about the Backyard Sports franchise, that's that 5th IP I mentioned. That, however, will be getting its own bigger video in the not-so-distant future because, believe me, there are a lot of games to be covered with that one, let me tell ya. This video is going to be on the shorter side compared to all of the other Humongous videos in my retrospective series, primarily due to A, the fact that I have zero nostalgic attachment to any of these games and thus have no personal stories to tell, and B, because most of them are a lot less complex when it comes to the internal makeup of the game. With that said, I see no reason to drag things out any further, so let's go ahead and get into these. I hereby present you with the lesser-known titles of Humongous Entertainment and Blue's Clues, a Humongous Entertainment retrospective.
Good night, Kayla.
Good night, Dad. Tomorrow's my birthday, and Mom and Dad did have a big surprise for me. Good night, Fatty Bear. You be good. I love you, Fatty Bear.
Following the release of Humongous Entertainment's first ever adventure game came their second ever adventure game. Wow, go figure. In the form of Fatty Bear's Birthday Surprise, another MS-DOS title based around the same point-and-click gameplay featured in Putt-Putt Joins the Parade using the Scum engine as a baseline. The primary difference this time around, however, lies in the game's main character, Fatty Bear, a dark brown teddy bear that comes alive at night when his owner Kayla is asleep. The immediate comparison that I can draw to this would be along the lines of something like Corduroy, the popular children's book by Don Freeman, which I also had at my aunt's house as a kid. Got a lot of nostalgia for that one too. Man, I love that book. Anyways, yes, this game is in the same vein as Putt-Putt Joins the Parade in the sense that it is one of Humongous Entertainment's earliest adventure titles, and it is the only Fatty Bear adventure game, period. Sure, there was also Fatty Bear's Fun Pack, which later got combined into Fatty Bear and Putt-Putt's Activity Pack, but those were just minigame collections. As far as the Fatty Bear adventure games go, this is it. The primary reason for this being that the rights to the Fatty Bear character were actually owned and held by the original creator rather than the company, which made making future Fatty Bear games more difficult due to the royalties and things like that. The original creator actually shared an image of the original bear that inspired the character on the Humongous Entertainment alumni Facebook page, which I figured I would share with all of you since it's kind of cool knowing the origins of where a character came from. That, and due to the unfortunate naming of the character, he wasn't easily as marketable as the other Humongous IPs, which was also a factor in why the company decided to stray away from more Fatty Bear games. But as for this one in particular, Fatty Bear's Birthday Surprise takes place the night before Fatty Bear's owner, Kayla's, birthday. And so, after she falls asleep, Fatty Bear and the rest of her toys get busy preparing for the following morning. The game starts out relatively simple. All the player needs to do is go searching around the house for the necessary ingredients needed to bake a cake, which seems fine enough on the surface. There is always a catch though, however, and in this particular scenario that happens to come in the form of this puppy dog here, which was presumably gotten by Kayla's parents as her big birthday gift.
I wonder what's in Kayla's present. Goodness gracious, there goes Kayla's birthday present. Oh no, look what she's done to the ribbon.
I dare say that puppy is a scamp.
This puppy is the devil, because not only does it run around destroying the package she was wrapped in and causing a racket all over the house, she also steals some of the letters that one of the toys was using to create a happy birthday message on the bulletin board, as well as stealing the chocolate chips needed for the cake and running outside to dig a hole in the garden where she proceeds to get all dirty. This puppy is the sole reason why the game lasts longer than 10 minutes, and while that's certainly a good thing because a 10-minute video game would be rather unfulfilling, you can't help but get a little agitated at this adorable little ball of cuteness creating so many additional problems for you that Fatty Bear has to correct. Honestly, this puppy right here, probably the most evil antagonist in any Humongous game. Most of the puzzles in this game, though, are remarkably straightforward, seeing as this was still within the very early days of the company where only a small handful of people were available to work on the project. This shouldn't come as much of a surprise, not to mention the fact that adventure games for young kids was still a very fresh and new idea at the time, so the standards of what younger children could and could not handle in an adventure game was very much a learning process for the adult designers, ironically enough.
Golly, howdy do!
Due to the limited resources at the time of this game's development, this is once again a very linear game that contains the same playthrough of puzzles and events every single time. I try not to make that sound like such a bad thing with these early DOS games because, again, it's important to keep in mind the limitations of the development behind games at the time, but when comparing these to other titles released by the company just a few years later, they don't compare, and that would hopefully be expected. It's kind of like the jump from the NES to the SNES, you know? At the very least, the environment is a fun setting to explore, and I adore the fact that the game takes place at night, whether it's the attic, the backyard, the basement. There's a lot of cool locations here for the player to explore, and click points are as abundant as can possibly be in every room of the house. There are a multitude of objects to click on, all of which play plenty of unique animations that are sure to amuse the younger audience. There is a really cool cameo present in the treehouse though, in which Fatty Bear can look through the telescope to see Putt-Putt driving on the moon.
A telescope. Well, if it isn't my little friend Putt-Putt. I wonder what Putt-Putt's doing on the moon.
A foreshadowing to the second upcoming Putt-Putt adventure title, which went on to release later that year. I'd say the high point of the game is the actual baking of the cake itself, seeing as most of the puzzles surrounding it involve Fatty Bear needing to acquire the ingredients, throwing them together in this mixing bowl, baking it in the oven, and then decorating the final product once it's finished cooling off. Sure, the puppy storyline is cool, but I love the zany animations that play as the player adds individual ingredients into the mixing bowl. Now that is a cake worth eating, if I do say so myself. The description of the game doesn't expand much further beyond that though. I mean, it's just a point-and-click game that takes place around a house with all the typical locations one would expect from a traditional home. I admire the game for taking risks and introducing certain sequences like the laundry chute or the closet inside the parents' bedroom where the player has to figure out how to obtain the ribbon at the top shelf. Those are probably the most dynamic moments of the entire game. Honestly, I just respect Fatty Bear for what it is, ultimately. Humongous Entertainment needed a second game to be put under their belt, and for an early title, it serves that purpose. I think it's a good example of showing what the company was like at its roots before it developed into its prime during the mid-1990s after the release of Freddy Fish 1. However, as somebody with no nostalgic attachment to this game whatsoever, the most I always knew about Fatty Bear was just his cameo appearances in future Humongous games like Putt-Putt Saves the Zoo and Pajama Sam 1. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this game to anybody when there are far superior children's adventure games out there produced by the company, mostly just to those dedicated fans who want to peer into the history of the company, kinda like I did in this video. It's a fine game, but very limited, akin to the likes of Putt-Putt Joins the Parade. I don't see myself coming back to this one anytime soon.
Happy birthday, Kayla! We have a surprise for you.
Oh, a puppy! This is the best birthday I ever had. Thank you, Fatty Bear. Oh, thank you, everybody.
So a lesser known fact about the release of Freddy Fish in the case of the missing kelp seeds is that despite the fact that the game had such a time crunch during its development, it wasn't the only Humongous game to release on October 28, 1994. No, in fact there was also the introduction of another Humongous Entertainment side series going by the label of Junior Field Trips, and featured a flying blue bug of some sort known as Buzzy the Knowledge Bug, who would serve as the guide to whatever chosen location happened to be the featured setting of the game. Let's Explore the Farm actually had two versions released within the span of a year. The first iteration was actually just called The Farm, as the Let's Explore moniker had not been established yet, nor was the opening theme song that ended up getting added to the re-released version of the game. The only major differences between this and the second release is that the first game has a slightly different interface at the bottom of the screen, where it is brown instead of white, and completely lacks the fun section that was later added to the re-released version. Otherwise though, they're pretty much the same game. Let's Explore the Farm introduces us to the Let's Explore series as a whole, a trilogy of point-and-click computer games that doesn't act like your traditional junior adventure that many would come to expect from the company by this point. No, instead the game is more of an exploration-based title, as it consists of a plethora of different screens featuring various noteworthy locations that one would typically find scattered around a farm. Produced in conjunction with Random House, the Let's Explore series was made with the intent of teaching children about various locations that they may or may not easily come across in their everyday lives. Seeing as the trilogy consisted of the farm, airport, and jungle settings, I could see how different groups of kids may not have gotten to experience one or more of those settings depending on where they had lived geographically at the time. After all, a kid living in New York City isn't going to walk outside and see a watermill or the Amazon rainforest, you know? While the Let's Explore series isn't a standout franchise by any means, I respect what these games are trying to do, and considering how many different features were implemented into them, I at least respect them for trying to flesh things out beyond the standard click on things and see what happens gameplay. Because when it comes down to it, that's the core element of these. Basically, just take away the story and characters of a junior adventure title like Freddy Fish, and you're left with a bunch of screens that all contain click points around an environment that play silly little animations. That's ultimately how I can describe these games. It's fun at first, a novel idea seeing as there are a lot of screens with a lot of click points around, but after all is said and done, it's a very shallow title, truthfully. This isn't like most of Humongous's junior adventure games where replayability is highly encouraged with different item spawn locations, and even the arcade games I would argue have more replayability thanks to features like the level editor. But at the very least the game does come with its own optional features located at the bottom bar, containing things like a button that has Buzzy come on screen and tell you about what you're currently looking at, as well as an index and a fun section with optional side modes. These include things like hide and seek, where Buzzy gives you an item and you need to find it located somewhere around the farm, which certainly reminded me of those old I Spy books and computer games which basically did the same thing, as well as a specialized minigame specific to Let's Explore the Farm only, Hangman, although it's not called that in this game for obvious reasons. As we'll see with the other two Let's Explore games, each come with their own exclusive minigame, and this is the one for Let's Explore the Farm. Speaking of which, Let's Explore the Farm on its own is probably the middle of the three games when it comes to quality. It has a decent number of rooms, but one of my biggest complaints is that trying to navigate around all of them can get a little annoying because sometimes screen transitions are essentially just one-way doors. For instance, when I leave this screen to go over to this next one, there's no on-screen option or arrow for me to go back to the room I was just in prior because I guess it wasn't mapped in all directions? I don't know, it's a very minor issue, but having to essentially go back to the main hub starting screen or go around in a giant circle just to get back to where I was is a little inconvenient and shouldn't have been an issue to begin with. Regardless, I think that the animation quality is decent, especially considering the time crunch that I assume to have existed with this game as well, given its release alongside Freddy Fish 1. It's fun enough for what it is. Still, no nostalgic attachment, and I didn't find myself invested in this game after playing it for the first time, so all I can really say is that I'm glad I gave it a chance to see what it was like, but I don't see myself returning to it ever again. It's fine enough for what it is, and would have been far more impressive to kids alive back in 1994, but seeing as I missed out on this one, all I can really do is judge it for what it is. The next game, however, I do have some attachment to.
Whoa! Will you look at this big, beautiful farm? Come on, let's go for a closer look.
And as with Let's Explore the Farm, Let's Explore the Airport followed suit with a release less than 1 year later in July of 1995, alongside a re-release of Let's Explore the Farm released on the same day, which had some minor updates and corrections made compared to the original version. Let's Explore the Airport is, without question, the best game in the Junior Field Trip trilogy because the game's activities, setting, and overall map layout vastly improved upon the foundation that Let's Explore the Farm had laid out, while not resorting to the restrictions that became prevalent in the third title. More on that shortly. Remember how I had criticized the farm for having inconsistent screen traversal with various loops and one-way paths that you couldn't easily get back to without backing out all the way back to the central hub? Well, Let's Explore the Airport did away with that almost completely. Now sure, there are a few screens right here on the starting area, such as with the helicopter in the bottom corner, which are single screen rooms that you can only enter and exit from in one direction, but it's not like you're walking through a one-way door. Otherwise, the entire airport terminal can be accessed from a multitude of different angles right off the bat, all of which cross over and intersect at various other points on screen. Of course, unless I missed one or two here and there. In my experience though, I was able to go any direction I wanted at all times. Gameplay-wise, however, it's the exact same principles as before. The game consists of a bunch of different screens, each of which display a different portion of the typical environment one would expect to encounter at an airport. You've got the parking garage, the luggage sorting machine, the actual inside of various planes and flying aircraft, which all serve to educate the young on the inner workings of what a typical airliner is like. The same returning features such as the index and hide and seek games return as before as well. And of course, the game is hosted by Buzzy the Knowledge Bug once again.
Down below is a picture of the item. Now you have to go find it.
Probably the most noteworthy new feature comes in the form of this luggage sorting minigame, in which the player is given the task of sending various passengers' luggage to the correct bin using the conveyor belts and machines to guide them to the end. It's a pretty fun game actually, probably the most engaging of the three, especially for what is meant to be nothing more than a side distraction. I really find the airport setting a fascinating choice for a game like this too. You know, the farm and jungle are more generic settings that are typical of kids games to delve into and explore, but the airport? That's a more unique and interesting setting that I can't think of very many other computer games really exploring. I kinda wish the Junior Field Trip series did more locations and environments like these because this was the most immersive of the three titles in my personal experience. The click points were great as always, and there were even a few that got a genuine laugh out of me because I flat out did not expect them.
This yours? Huh? Yeah? Huh? Yeah? Huh? Huh? Yeah?
No, that's not mine.
Baggage from flight 9.
How about this one?
Will be on
Huh?
carousel
Yeah?
number 2.
Huh? Yeah?
Oh, heavens, no.
How about this one? Huh? Yeah? Huh? Yeah? Huh? Huh? Yeah?
Oh, my gracious goodness, no.
I used to play the demo for Let's Explore the Airport quite a bit when I was a kid, as it's the only one I really ever had access to, so I'm especially familiar with the click points located on board the airplane, such as the trays that fly back and forth, or the microwave, or the fish that ignites itself and blasts off for some particular reason. All in all though, that's Let's Explore the Airport for you. It's a fun enough game and probably the most unique in the franchise, but would I say there's any reason for a kid to play this nowadays? Not really, considering a lot of the technology and imagery present in the game is from the 1990s, and the technology, as well as the general airport protocol, has changed a ton since this game initially came out, especially because it came out in 1994. At most, this game is simply a time capsule of what airports used to be like at the time of its release, but its significance doesn't extend far beyond that. I still like it though, and like I said, the conveyor belt game is very, very fun. But we can move on to the final Junior Field Trip now.
There's so much to explore at the airport, so let's get going.
And now we have the third and final installment in the Junior Field Trip trilogy. Let's Explore the Jungle. You probably get the gist by this point. There's an open area to explore with dozens of click points present in the game that play fun animations with the intent of teaching its players about the jungle and the various different creatures that live inside of them. Of the three games, however, I would say this one is the weakest by far when it comes to the world design because it tries to have its cake and eat it too. See, the game introduces three regions of jungles here: Asian, African, and Amazon. This is cool in the sense that the game accurately reflects different types of jungles around the world and the creatures that each region contains. However, this also means that none of them intersect with each other, and the map itself is kind of misleading. I think it would have been better if there was a geographic map of the Earth with the three different continents highlighted the particular color indicating the type of jungle and where it's located. There's no crossover or quick transition from screen to screen. Each area consists purely of a select handful of rooms for each region, which the player needs to fully exit back out to the main hub screen in order to access one of the other two. I get that this was done in order to prevent confusion so that kids didn't confuse the Amazonian animals for an Asian jungle dweller, but it ultimately limits the actual structure of the game. That, coupled with the fact that, I'll be honest, it's very difficult to distinguish between each form of jungle here because they all look exactly the same. If I showed you this underwater screen and this underwater screen, would you be able to tell me which jungle each one is from? And if I showed you this example and asked you which of the three types of jungles this is, would you be able to tell me the correct answer assuming you didn't already know the geographic location of the animals on screen, which most kids playing this probably wouldn't because this is meant to educate them on where the particular animals live? Probably not, right? Exactly. It's visually indistinguishable and the most limited of the three. Plus, with every screen just containing a bunch of animals with a few iconic set pieces, it all just jumbles together. The farm and the airport especially had distinguishing rooms that pertained to a specific aspect of the setting it was showing off. You could easily distinguish the barn from the field from the watermill, and the terminal from the parking garage from the interior of a plane. Here, no such distinction exists, and thus I can imagine many kids confusing some of these rooms for the wrong jungle. I respect what the game was going for, but in all honesty, I think it fails miserably. Oh, and the special minigame for this title is an anteater themed arcade shooter game. Nothing special, really. It's a shame that the last title in the Junior Field Trip series had to be such a dud, especially considering the second game was very, very good, but them's the ropes, I guess. Don't have much more to say on this one. All the praises I had were more applicable to the previous two games, rather than Let's Explore the Jungle. Next.
Hello there.
How are you?
It's great to see you here. I'm Ben.
Becky Bradley.
Let's start off with a cheer.
Yay!
We'll face challenges together. Think big and you will see. You can do amazing things just like Ben and me.
1997 was a big year for Humongous, but unfortunately not every game released ended up becoming a smash hit. Such was the fate of the Big Thinkers series, a heavily educational-oriented miniseries consisting of two games that released on the exact same day: Big Thinkers Kindergarten and Big Thinkers First Grade. If you thought the Junior Field Trip series leaned a bit too far into the educational side of things, that's nothing compared to Big Thinkers. This is the most edutaining that Humongous Entertainment ever got. Playing this game with zero nostalgic attachment and an education far beyond the levels that these games were intended for, this is an absolute slog to get through. Honestly, I wouldn't have even bothered playing this at all if I wasn't intentionally covering every single game that the company ever made, ever. To me, Big Thinkers comes across as nothing more than a generic educational game that has very little identity to it. I mean, compared to iconic characters like Spy Fox and Putt-Putt, these are just generic looking people with blue hair. Pajama Sam is a much better human-like character when it comes down to it because he has the whole pajama costume as well as the iconic blue tint. At the very least, I appreciate that the games are hosted by a male and female character in order to broaden the demographic a bit, but that's not really saying much when it comes to the games. I originally wanted these when I played the demo for the first time as a very, very young child, but in retrospect, I'm glad my parents didn't buy them for me because I would have been sorely disappointed in these two and probably would have stopped playing them after a very short time. When it comes down to it, the core of the gameplay functions exactly the same for both the kindergarten and first grade titles, and seeing as both both games were released on the exact same day, I'm just going to be grouping them both together in this one section. That said, I'll mostly be using Kindergarten as the basis for most of my criticisms, and then acknowledging any potential differences or noteworthy comments I have regarding the first grade edition. The Big Thinkers games exist as glorified minigame collections, like I said, that primarily have a focus of teaching kids about various different topics like math, language arts, and music, although there's certainly a fair share of other games thrown in there that allow them to express their creativity, such as the Face Swap minigame. After completing a certain number of games under a given topic, the player is awarded with what the game calls Smart Stars, which are essentially a form of currency that the player can use in the final grand challenge of the game.
You're good at this.
Ahoy, Smart Stars!
Players can also track their progress in the book that they use to create their user profile at the very beginning, although these stars aren't really used for much else beyond the climactic final game that isn't all that exciting, considering it just amounts to a maze where you spend stars to move a certain distance until you make it to the end, where nothing happens. The first grade equivalent isn't much better either. Okay, maybe something does happen, but I couldn't be bothered to just sit there and grind stars for hours on end until I completed enough of the maze. I'm sorry. I have better things to do. At the very least, I can compliment all of the nifty animations that play whenever the stars show up on screen, as they squash and stretch in the typical Humongous style of animation while warping into the star bank, which I chose to be modeled after Pep in the kindergarten version as a nice reference to the Putt-Putt franchise, and for the first grade version, Freddy Fish for the franchise of the same name. In typical Humongous fashion, there are references to the other properties scattered around the house, and plenty of clickable objects are available to interact with that all play exciting little animations that younger kids are probably gonna get a kick out of. As far as most of the minigames go, I think that there are definitely some better than others. For instance, one of the most enticing games is probably the hide and seek challenge because it's a lot more fun and interesting to use context clues while taking advantage of the visual medium of the game, as opposed to watching some birds land on their arms and count. Although sometimes the game just outright lies to you about the hints, because I can't think I've ever heard of an island where there was no water present.
Your first clue was, I don't see any water where Ben is hiding. Your second clue was, I can see one or more trees growing there. And your third and final clue is, I see rocks there. We didn't find him this time. Where are you, Ben?
Here I am. I'm on this island.
I don't see any water where Ben is hiding.
Liar!
Especially an island that small, but alright. Still, for every good minigame, there's 2 or 3 weak ones. For instance, one minigame consists of nothing more than rearranging 3 letters in alphabetical order, except the game literally throws the whole alphabet on screen for the player, so there's no challenge whatsoever. Just look up above and put them in that order. I get that the repetition can help a kid in learning the alphabet, but there's no game whatsoever, and the only reward amounts to Becky transforming into something that can start with the letter chosen by the player. I think it would have been better if the alphabet was actually hidden during the actual challenge and the player could only refer to it before being asked a set of questions. That way they have to do it off of their own memory instead of just being able to look and not really think about it. Another game is just telling time on an analog clock, even though analog clocks are practically obsolete in today's world and were even back then, but hey, I was still forced to learn how to read a clock face in school despite my teachers literally telling me time and time again for like many years in a row that by the time I graduated high school, I would probably never need to know how to read one because everything would be all digital by that point, and hey, they were right, but I can read an analog clock anyways now, I guess. Love the American education system. The first grade version of Big Thinkers isn't much better. It consists of the exact same formula with a bunch of different minigames scattered around the exact same house with some slight tweaks in graphics and some rooms being only accessible in one version compared to the other. For instance, in the kindergarten version, you can actually go out into the backwoods area and explore the forest that's around there, while in the first grade version, you can go to Ben and Becky Brightly's garage. Ultimately though, I just don't have many good things to say about Big Thinkers in comparison to most other Humongous Entertainment franchises, and I've done my best to hold my tongue because I really do not like these games. It doesn't feel like it has much of an identity given how it comes across as just a generic educational computer game far out of line compared to the junior adventures the company was prominently known for at the time. I don't think Ben and Becky Brightly have any personality whatsoever, and this really doesn't feel like a Humongous Entertainment game. This is something that one of their lesser competitors would produce. course. The company's mantra was always about prioritizing fun over school, and this kind of feels like the exact opposite of that. I can't recommend the Big Thinkers series to anyone, not even Humongous enthusiasts, because there's nothing here for a crowd above the age of 7. The writing is low level, the animation is standard, but the games are bare bones at best and unintuitive in all honesty. I will certainly never be returning to these ever again. Very disappointed to say the least, and I understand why the second grade version was canceled, and why they didn't sell well. Makes perfect sense to me, honestly. I don't ever see myself coming back to play these at any other point in my life.
Want to check out a book?
You don't need a library card here.
Hello there.
How are you?
It's great to see you here. I'm Ben.
Becky Brightly.
Let's start off with a cheer.
Yay!
We'll face challenges together. Think big and you will see.
You can do amazing things just like that.
Hi out there, it's me, Steve. Have you seen Blue, my puppy? Where is she?
A lesser-known fact about Humongous Entertainment, or at the very least a less remembered fact, is that they were actually responsible for working in conjunction with Nickelodeon to produce a series of Blue's Clues games which saw its premiere release in 1998. I go into the story a little bit more in my gargantuan history video about the company, but the short and sweet version of the story goes that Nickelodeon reached out to Humongous to develop some educational software programs that would get children invested in a new branch of the Blue's Clues brand. And personally speaking, I think this was a brilliant proposition, both in terms of the business aspect and just art in general, because let's be real, Blue's Clues is the literally perfect kind of show to be made into a point-and-click adventure game, because the show itself was already structured like one. That alone made Humongous the perfect choice for a company that would develop these games, and I'll give the decision makers the benefit of the doubt and say that they probably knew of the success Humongous brought to that genre, which is why that made them the go-to choice. And so, after months of working together on the project, the first game in the series, Blue's Birthday, came to be, and it's all you could ever really ask for from a Blue's Clues adventure game. Take an episode of the show, give the kid control of which room Steve can go to at any time and what he interacts with, and that's exactly what these games are like. In terms of the execution, I can find a few flaws with this title, but the game does exactly what it sets out to do by giving the player the control of a Blue's Clues episode. The faithfulness is through the roof when comparing it to the show because all of the stapled Blue's Clues characters and structure is still present here. The game opens with Blue wanting to do something special at her upcoming birthday party, whether it be what she wants to eat or what kind of entertainment she wants to partake in, and then after a brief conversation with Steve, she begins a game of Blue's Clues. From there, Steve guides the player around his house to all of the different rooms and locations so that the two of them can work together to figure out what it is Blue wants to do at her party.
We have all 3 clues! No, we don't. We have to find all 3 clues before we go to the thinking chair. Sheesh, don't scare me like that.
You know, Steve, I'm not gonna lie, you really had me convinced for a second there. Scattered about the game are a few different rooms consisting of iconic locations from the show, ranging from the kitchen to the bathroom to the front yard. During the game, the player can also interact with characters like Shovel and Pail, Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper, Mailbox, and much, much more. The title, like most point-and-click games, encourages the player to click on everything in the environment, and with being a Humongous Entertainment game and all, click points are aplenty as cute animations play whenever the player clicks on things like balloons or picture frames. The complexity of the puzzles present in this game are nowhere near to the level of difficulty of something like Pajama Sam, Spy Fox, or even Freddy Fish. If anything, this feels like it's mostly on par with the Putt-Putt series when it comes to that, with most of the puzzles taking only 1 or 2 steps to solve at most before the player acquires a clue.
So this clue is gold. Whoa. You know what we need? Our handy-dandy notebook.
And the player actually gets to help piece the drawing together while it's done. Again, another staple of the show making its way into the game, while also adding a level of interactivity. As to be expected, like I said, pretty much every standard event of the Blue's Clues series is present here. Aside from Mailbox coming in to share some random facts with Steve on the thinking chair, that's like the one thing that was missing. On a completely random tangent, I don't remember what a single one of those sequences was ever about at all, except for the one where Steve learns how jeans are made. I don't know why I remember that that segment specifically. Well, actually I do now that I think about it. It's because I owned a copy of that episode on VHS, so I'd watch it over and over again as a small child. In fact, I think that's the episode specifically where Steve takes 2 plastic bottles and tapes them together to create a water vortex thing, which I did in real life thanks to the show. Anyways, back to the game at hand. What's particularly interesting about Blue's Birthday is that it actually comes in the form of 2 different discs, a red version and a yellow version, each of which contain 2 different playthroughs on them. That's right, in typical peak Humongous fashion, Blue's Birthday also supports multiple playthroughs in the form of different storylines that each contain their own sets of clues. While the theme of it being Blue's birthday party still remains the same, the actual activity that Blue wants to partake in can vary among the 4 possible playthroughs present in the game. This certainly caters to that replayability aspect that I've praised so much, and the same holds true here. Sure, the general layout of Steve's home remains the same, but the character interactions or locations in which they are present get shuffled around depending on which path you're currently on, and the world that Blue and Steve can skidoo to changes depending on the playthrough as well. So there is still quite a lot to experience by playing all 4 pathways.
Blue skidoo, we can too.
Bebop skidoo, Steve. Bebop skidoo. Now, I wouldn't necessarily recommend playing all 4 in one sitting the way I did because I found myself getting a little worn out towards the second half of it, but all in all, it definitely has a longer span of playtime thanks to the different pathways that exist. The transitions from screen to screen are pretty fluid, although it does get a little intrusive having to sit through a transition of Steve running outside or back inside depending on the direction that he came from, because that didn't really have any bearing on the game itself. It just felt like a waste of time. The ending payoff that the player gets to experience depending on the activity Blue wants to do is rewarding as well. For instance, in one pathway, Blue wants to put on a puppet show, so the ending activity allows the player to make various combinations of different puppets that can put on a show for the player after they've made their selections. Another sees the player guiding Blue through a treasure hunt. It's a nice reward for going through the game and clicking on the various clues scattered about. Of course, there are other activities present throughout the game as well. For instance, the player can help Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper bake a cake, or assist Tickety Clock with assigning the right sounds to the correct instruments. Like I said, the game is a pretty engaging Blue's Clues experience from beginning to end, as it essentially does just give the player control over how they want to experience their particular episode. All the same songs and art style are directly from the show too. I mean, how much more praise can I give it in this department? In terms of a game that's trying to meet what it sets out to do, this one succeeds on all fronts. Minimal complaints here. However, compared to the actual junior adventure games that the company is known for, I'd much rather be playing those because the complexity of those puzzles far outshine this, and the storylines and worlds are far more vivid in the original titles and more fun to re-experience over and over again. After all, Blue's Clues was a TV show first and a game second, whereas the junior adventure franchises were made as computer games from the get-go. But if I can take one more brief aside here, I was a massive Blue's Clues fan as a kid. I mean, I would watch this show every day on Nick Jr. when I was younger, so coming back to this now after all these years, because believe me, I'd been absent from the show ever since Steve basically left for college. Dude, I got the biggest wave of nostalgia rushing over me as I played this game. I still remember watching that episode with Steve and Joe on live TV, okay? Like, that was a huge moment for me. And don't get me wrong, I thought Joe was a fine host, but Steve was like my role model, so you better believe I got a little emotional the handful of times he's returned to do something Blue's Clues related online, whether it was appearing in the follow-up reboot to pass the torch off to the host of that show, Josh, or just the occasional social media post that manages to amass over 1 million likes, which really goes to show how influential this one single person was on an entire generation of people. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. Getting to play this game for the very first time because, yes, despite my love for Blue's Clues as a kid, I never really actually owned any of the Humongous Entertainment games, although I certainly played the demo, was just so wholesome for me. And that's what Blue's Clues always was. Charming, wholesome, fun. I can happily say that Blue's Birthday successfully lives up to capturing the same feeling that the original show did back when it was on the air, so zero complaints from me there. Unfortunately, due to Nickelodeon owning the rights to the Blue's Clues IP and Humongous being, well, practically non-existent, I doubt these games are ever going to be released anywhere ever again. Still, this one deserves to be remembered as a solid Blue's Clues title that any kid would have gotten a kick out of back in the day. It was a solid game then, and I'd say it still is decades later. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Thank you so much for all your help today.
Now it's time for so long. But we'll sing just one more song.
Oh, hi. You're just in time. Blue and I were working on our word books.
Blue's Birthday wasn't the only Blue's Clues game to release in the fall of 1998, however. Alongside that came the release of a smaller side game titled Blue's ABC Time Activities. Think something in a similar vein to the Activity Pack, but more closely similar to the Big Thinkers games that the company had released before, in the sense that the game primarily takes place in one room where the players can click on a variety of different characters and play a bunch of different mini-games with Blue and the cast of Blue's Clues characters. Honestly, this is just another one of those minigame collection CDs with a primary theme revolved all around the alphabet and basic spelling, as the title would lead you to believe. The basic premise is set up like this. Steve and Blue are currently working on writing their own stories in their word books, but Blue doesn't have a lot of words in her vocabulary to choose from. Thus, Steve tasks the player with assisting her in different word games so that she can finish the pre-written Mad Libs inside her storybook after enough words are collected.
Oh, right, Blue. We still have to find words for your word book, so you can make up really cool stories, like me.
From here, Steve leaves the player with Blue to go around and play whatever word-based games they want, and similar to how Big Thinkers awarded players with the Smart Star system, this game awards the player with a new specially colored word for Blue to use in her book, presumably with the end goal of collecting them all. Of course, I don't have the time to sit and play this game for hours on end gathering them all, but judging by the sheer multitude of possible words that could appear in Blue's book, I can imagine it would only take a short time to complete. Within the game, there are activities like listing out the alphabet in order to get Blue through a sand maze to shovel and pail. Another activity has you filling letters into words with mailbox, and of course, probably the most engaging game present here consists of Blue skidooing into the picture frame and assisting this lion prince with taking pictures of the different jungle animals in order to fill up his scrapbook. All of these games are basic on a very fundamental level, and like Big Thinkers, many of these games are less fun-oriented and more education-based, which, with me being far above the level of intelligence that these games were designed for, led to this being a bit of a drag.
Thanks for helping me. D-O-G-D-A-G. Dog. Dog.
And that's to be expected. I'm very well of the demographic that these games are targeted towards, and I have no doubt that kids at a young age who loved Blue's Clues like myself probably got a ton of fun playing this game back then. It's a shame I missed out because I probably would have gotten some fun hours out of playing this game too, but oh well. At the end of the game, when the player decides to quit, Steve comes back and talks to them about how many words Blue learned, and then the game ends off on a positive note. But as it stands now, this game is simply a relic of the past and not one I see worth returning to for any reason whatsoever. It's not a true point-and-click adventure title like Blue's Birthday and only contains a small handful of minigames. It'd be fun to a kid for an afternoon, but there really isn't a lot of replayability present here if you ask me. Humongous certainly knew how to kill it with their mainline junior adventure releases. As I've mentioned before, I kind of forget the games are made for such young audiences when the writing and characters are so witty that only an adult would really get the jokes half the time. But this, they just feel like they're 4 levels lower when it comes to the content present within the games. It's fine, but it ain't for me anymore. As I mentioned with Blue's Birthday, the game certainly looks like the show, so the graphics hold up extremely well, but that's the best compliment I can give it.
You know, I think you may grow up to be a famous writer. Oh, yeah. Thanks for all your help. Wait.
Now it's time for so long. But we'll sing just one more song.
Released 1 year after Blue's ABC Time Activities, Blue's 1, 2, 3 Time Activities is the exact same game as before in terms of progression, structure, and overall difficulty challenge. Just replace the letters with numbers. This time around, at the very least, the game takes place at Blue's Big Backyard Fair, which Steve introduces at the very beginning of the game.
Oh! Hi! And welcome to the Big Backyard Fair! Ah, hey, Blue, look who made it to the Big Backyard. Blue? Where is Blue? Do you see her?
Of course, as with the ABC game, Steve doesn't actually follow the player along in, he just stands outside greeting people while the player gets to go inside with Blue and play a multitude of different number games, all with the intent of teaching the player things like how to count and shapes and patterns. It's fine as an educational piece of software, but this is once again for extremely low levels of education, like the most basic math you can really get.
Blue, you may move 6 spaces forward. Yes, you may. Which number will you end up on? 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps. Blue moves 6 steps. Great counting! That puts you on number 6.
Completing each game earns the player a blue dollar, which can be used to buy various parts inside the prize tent that all come together to make one major prize after all of them are purchased. From what I can tell, there are 4 major prizes to earn, although I could be wrong, there might be more than that. I only bothered to speed through and get enough to earn the first prize, so I'm assuming the game just repeats the same structure over and over again with each new prize when they're unlocked. At the very least, you get another cutscene with Steve where he congratulates you for earning a prize, but then he goes right back to standing at the gate while Blue returns to the fair. There are 6 major games present here at the Backyard Fair, just like there were in the ABC game. Things like a Mother May I counting game with shovel and pail, or pattern identification game, there's a weight-based challenge, things like that. All of them involve numbers in some form. None of these are particularly difficult, but I found the Mother May I game to be the easiest one to grind blue dollars on, if it's any consolation. Never in my life did I imagine I would ever have to grind in a Humongous Entertainment game, but here we are, I guess. Yeah, other than that, it's very similar to the activities game I already talked about before. It's a new subject with new games, but it's still got the same concept of having the player grind out 6 different things over and over again to unlock all the things in the title. Perhaps there's some sort of special prize for collecting all the toys, I have no idea, but that's not really something I consider to be important personally, so I didn't do it. That's about all I have to say for this one though, so let's go ahead and move on to the bigger Blue's Clues game.
Hey, thank you so much for all your help today.
Now it's time for so long. But we'll sing just one more song.
Continuing the series of Blue's Clues games comes the second and final adventure-like title, Blue's Treasure Hunt. This time around, instead of following Blue all over Steve's house in search of clues to figure out what activity Blue wants to do at her birthday party, Steve and Blue are tasked by a treasure bug to find the special treasures of various characters in order to gain access to the Land of Great Discovery.
Yeah, Blue, a treasure hunt that will take us to the Land of Great Discovery.
As a sequel to the first title, Blue's Treasure Hunt does just about everything a good sequel should. Keep what worked initially and improve upon the weaker aspects. Most notably, the one major difference between Birthday and Treasure Hunt is that, while both games feature 4 distinct sets of Blue's Clues episodes to follow, Treasure Hunt chronologically ties each path together, so unlike Birthday, where each of the 4 paths could essentially be viewed as an alternate timeline of the same scenario, Treasure Hunt tells one overarching story over the course of 4 sets of Blue's Clues. Disc 1 contains the first 2 storylines as well as the introduction to the entire premise of the game, where Treasure Bug introduces the rules of the treasure hunt and what lies in the future for them if they decide to go through with it. This game is themed around the idea of not necessarily physical treasures, although of course treasure chests are a prevalent motif, but rather personal, valued treasures, items or experiences that individual characters hold dear not for their economic or monetary value, but the sentimental kind. Which, hey, I kinda like that theme. It gives kids an idea of what they personally find value in that they may not have ever really thought deeply about before. Plus, come on, treasure hunts were always fun as a kid, let's be real. From here, the player joins Steve in another round of Blue's Clues to figure out Paprika's personal treasure first. And just like the last game, as well as the TV show, it's up to them to navigate around the screen and find 3 clues to figure out Paprika's favorite treasure. Simultaneously, however, the game has expanded upon its objectives a little bit to extend the depth of the treasure hunt and game time. Not only does the player need to determine what treasure is held dear to a particular character, they must also find the locations of the treasure chest that is hidden somewhere around the world.
You found me! Now if you know Paprika's favorite treasure, the one that is her greatest pleasure, I will give you the first key to the land of great discovery.
The first case has the example of the back playground at Blue's school. In order to find these chests, the player must solve 3 riddles to obtain it, with each riddle given to the player by the character that serves as the answer to the previous one. It's relatively simple, and unlike the clues where you really have to explore the environment to find them because there aren't any hints given, these are pretty easy to find because as long as you know your cast of Blue's Clues characters, there's only so many possibilities that these could possibly be. One of the drawbacks to making sequential Blue's Clues games, though, is that because the show's universe primarily takes place just inside Steve's house, the games also have to abide by the same settings, so as far as this is concerned, the layout of Steve's house is nearly unchanged aside from the removal of birthday-themed assets. In order to compensate for this, however, Humongous added new locations that can be visited outside of Steve's house, including Blue's school, as well as the local park. These are welcome additions that I feel really expand the size of the game compared to the more contained Blue's birthday. Not that being contained is a bad thing, because they both have their pros and cons, but I really found myself enjoying Blue's Treasure Hunt more because the game had more to do and explore. Still, having to play through the game 3 times before getting to the final chapter can feel a bit redundant, but at least you're always helping a new character and visiting new places to skidoo to with each pathway as well. For those curious, the second path sees Mailbox as the main friend with a personal treasure, while the third has Magenta as its focus. After having solved the other 3 rounds of Blue's Clues, the final chapter opens up to Steve, Blue, and the player, in which they all finally do get to go to the land of great discovery, where they get to witness some of their own favorite treasures. And that's Blue's Treasure Hunt in a nutshell. Personally, I find this is the best Blue's Clues game that Humongous Entertainment ever put out. It's got more to separate its individual pathways, unlike Blue's birthday, and with the updated cast of characters that were also introduced in the show around the same time, such as Paprika, this game just feels like a much better experience overall. Of all the Blue's Clues games in existence, this is the one that I would recommend the most. It's a good time from beginning to end, has far more engaging puzzles to solve and clues to find, and a far more gripping, overarching storyline. It's a thumbs up from me.
Wow! Look at that! There it is. The land of great discovery! We're almost there! But it's really far away. Hey, maybe we need another key to get there. Looks like we better finish the big treasure hunt. Yeah. Hey, you're here. Blue and I were just getting ready for the really big art show. Come on in.
And would you look at that, the Blue's Clues train hasn't stopped just yet, because in the year 2000, Humongous Entertainment went ahead and released 2 more activity pack games similar to the ABC and 1-2-3 packs that I have already discussed. This time primarily focusing on the subjects of reading and writing and art. These 2 games aren't all that special though, and sadly there was no full-on adventure title like there was in previous years with Blue's Birthday and Blue's Treasure Hunt. Instead, these are both just more minigame collections that consist of Blue partaking in various grammar and artistic activities in order to teach young players more about each given subject. Considering how similar that these 2 games are to the previous titles I've already discussed, and given that they were released on the same date, I'm going to be combining their entry together similar to how I did for Putt-Putt and Freddy Fish's Junior Arcade games. As such, Blue's Art Time activities sees Blue and Steve heading off to Blue's school where an art exhibit is currently in preparation for getting underway. Steve educates the player on the creative value that art holds and encourages them to assist Blue in going around the school and helping the other students like Chalk Girl and Periwinkle with their art projects before they go on display at the big art showcase.
Ooh! I just got my inspiration for the art show. I'm gonna make a masterpiece. Yeah.
At the very least, this game has more of a clear-cut objective with a beginning, middle, and end, and with Steve giving the player 5 objectives to complete. The first of which is to help Periwinkle with his storybook, where the player can choose one of the many books to color in dependent upon the events that Periwinkle describes. I believe I managed to create one heck of a masterpiece, if I do say so myself.
Ooh, red! That's a warm color. You must really like this color.
Second up is Marky Marker's art project, consisting of designing an invitation card that could be given out to individuals inviting them to the art show at the school, which I once again excelled at with flying colors, pun intended. Blue can also assist Chalk Girl with various chalkboard drawings, all centered around a certain theme, and I personally chose to take a more abstract route with the direction of expression that I wish to portray. After all, art is all about creative expression, is it not? And Blue can also help Aluminum create a diorama out of recyclable materials using the various items scattered around the land. Lastly, there's also a ribbon that Blue needs to obtain to award the winning art participant, which is earned by playing this overly long and drawn out game in which you need to mix primary colors in order to move to the corresponding secondary color square. However, because the colors just repeat in the same pattern the whole way across the board, the fastest route is just to repeat purple over and over again until the last tile, because otherwise you won't be maximizing the distance traveled. And there are 10 ribbons in the game that you need to earn by doing this game, by the way. Yeah, no thanks. This game was already a slog to sit through just to get one ribbon and is easily the least engaging of all of the games given its simplicity. Definitely my least favorite part of the whole experience, for sure. But upon acquiring all 5 objectives, the player in Blue meet back up with Steve to get the show on the road, and Steve also gets to display his own work of art that he was spending time on while Blue was going around the school. The player has the ability to award the ribbon to whichever exhibit they want to win the most. However, given that Steve is the true OG here, of course I had to give it to him.
Me? My painting is your favorite? I'm so flattered. Thanks.
Anything for you, Steve. I owe you big time. But that's the Art Time Activities game in a nutshell. As with before, it's just a handful of activities combined together with a small narrative that's more prevalent than the letters or number games.
Oh, hi, it's me, Steve. You know, you're just in time. Blue and I are just headed over to the newsstand. Do you want to come along?
The second title, Blue's Reading Time Activities, follows the exact same formula as Art Time Activities, only focused on reading and writing more than visual artistry. Blue and Steve are heading to get the local paper, but Cash Register is all out of newspapers to sell and needs to deposit their earnings at the bank.
Maybe we could make more newspapers for Cash Register. Yeah. Our paper could be called the Big News Gazette. In fact, we could all go to the library and see if we can find some news around there.
As such, Steve agrees to watch the stand while Blue and the player continue on to the school so that the two of them can work together on creating a new issue of the newspaper for Cash Register to sell. Thus, the player needs to go around the school participating in various activities so that they can add new articles to different sections of the school paper. These activities include listening and responding to Periwinkle's story ideas once again, playing a card matching game with Magenta, Shovel, and Pail, or Mr. Salt, Mrs. Pepper, and Paprika. The player can follow Mailbox to a different location where the player can move Blue based on instruction cards. They can write their own story using various stickers. Yeah, it's all similar to how Art Time Activities was set up, just with word-based activities rather than art-based ones. I know I've said that once already, but really I cannot drive that point home enough. After compiling all 5 pages of the issue, the player can take the paper back to the newsstand with Steve, but unlike the art game, which then went to a special cutscene after completing all objectives, Reading Time Activities says get out there and make 4 more papers.
Wow, the first edition of the Big News Gazette! Cash Register's gonna be so happy. Oh, and if you want, you can make a few more. I wonder what will happen when this shelf is filled up.
So I decided to call it quits right there and then because I'm not about to go do the exact same thing I did all over again 4 more times, as with the Art Time Activities. I can see why the game would try to extend its runtime in doing this by repetition, but it's just not worth it to me. Also, as one final side note, both of these games consist of assets that were primarily used in Blue's Treasure Hunt, so there's not really that many new things to see in this game that wasn't already present in the former example I just listed. But that's Blue's Art and Reading Time Activities for you. There's not much more to them than that. It would have been nice to get one more full-on adventure game, but given that these are the final Blue's Clues games that were produced by the company, I can't really complain about the note that it ended on. I'd definitely rank them above 1, 2, 3 and ABC Time Activities though, at the very least.
You know, with me and you and my dog Blue, we can do anything
That we wanna do. Bye-bye. See you later.
to Moonbase Commander.
And now we're brought to Moonbase Commander, probably the most unique computer game Humongous Entertainment was ever responsible for producing. Like, ever. This game is far from the realm of adventure and sports titles like Freddy Fish and Backyard Soccer. Nope, this game was made for an older audience with the intent of capturing a more turn-based strategy crowd. Having been purchased by Infogrames in June of 2001, Humongous Entertainment was at the mercy of their corporate overlords to give them the green light on any of their future projects, and original creator Rhett Mathis had to face the brunt of it for months on end, only for the final result to be, well, undeserved. An article posted on the website Gamma Sutra does a better job of telling the story of Rhett's many obstacles than I ever could, so I highly recommend giving it a read because it has several in-depth accounts on the process he had to face in order to get the final product released. There were points where his higher-ups wanted to change the game's aesthetic to gardens and plants instead of moon bases, and thought that the target demographic of the game was meant for the same age range as Humongous's usual crowd because they didn't give the actual concept of the game any thought whatsoever. I don't feel bad when I say this. Those higher-ups just about had to be some of the stupidest people I think I've ever heard of when it comes to running a business. The intent of this game could not be more clear that it was aimed at a preteen to teen audience with the possibility of leaning into a young adult range too. And come on, moon bases are so much cooler than gardens, I mean really. Moonbase Commander is actually, believe it or not, a tactical strategy game consisting of various factions located on different moon-like environments that were intent on wiping out all of the rivaling factions to obtain utter domination of the region that they're on. Utilizing the various different resources, weapons, and gadgets at their disposal, the player is given many opportunities to achieve this end goal, with the very nature of this game being all about strategic maneuvers to ensure victory in the long run. Moonbase Commander has a lot of versatility when it comes to its game modes. There are options for single and multiplayer, although unfortunately no such online mode would have existed for this game at the time, nor does one exist in the present day because it was never added to the Steam re-release by Rebellion, the current owners of the game. There's also a challenge mode present, which is a fun way to challenge players to solve puzzles using the limited resources at their disposal. I'm personally not a big tactical computer game guy, so this game doesn't really appeal to me personally, and I apologize if I don't sound as excited about this game as I probably should. I know there are many enthusiasts out there that praise this game like crazy. I mean, it even won awards back in 2002 for being the best game that nobody bought that year. Clearly, there is an audience for this, and that much I can respect it for. I can certainly see how a game like this could be fun, trying to destroy the enemy bases while reinforcing your own with a versatile slew of different weapons and gadgets, and the whole mechanic of aiming and launching each extension a set distance that is then linked to the primary hub provides an interesting gameplay element for sure. In order to win Moonbase Commander, you need to wipe out the entire enemy factions off the map, so in order to do that, you need to destroy said faction's main hub. The way the damage is usually dealt in this game is with various weapons which deal larger or smaller amounts of damage based on the resources currently available. Some weapons can even cause damage to carry down the links to hit multiple structures at the same time. This means that if the original starting hub is ever destroyed at any point, everything that's attached to it gets destroyed as well, in which creates another element of strategy. Do you try to wear down a faction by destroying it from the outside going in? Or do you attempt to go straight for the heart for a quicker strike while having to deal with the consequences of said actions should you fail to defeat the opponent? I like the idea at play here, and I'm glad that so many other people out there get a kick out of this game. It is very well put together. I love the presentation, and the fact that each faction has a different user interface in-game gives it that extra touch that earns additional brownie points in my book. I'm afraid that I truly can't do this game justice because I don't have the expertise of a turn-based strategy computer game player the way I do with the junior adventure games. But I still recommend this title to be given a look by anybody regardless, because who knows? You may end up loving it. It's not for me, it's not my style of game, but I respect it. No matter how much hardship Rhett and his team had to face to try and get this game on store shelves only for their parent company to not market it at all and then write it off as a failure even though they were the ones responsible for its lack of sales and performance, Moonbase Commander is a game worthy of respect. I wish this game was successful, I truly do, but at the same time I am a little glad that this didn't become a hit because then Infogrames would probably have milked it dry, and a company like that isn't deserving of a game this good. It's a double-edged sword, really. I mean, I wish the game was more successful, and I wish the team's creators got more recognition for it, but no matter what way you look at it, there's not really a win-win scenario. But I digress. Infogrames no longer exists, and the game is available through other platforms, so I highly recommend everybody watching this video checks it out. It's undeniably well made, even if it's not my kind of game.
Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will enjoy this classic strategy game as much as we do. See you on the moon, Commander.
And with that, the various side experiments of Humongous Entertainment have been covered in full. In anticipation of this question being brought up, yes, I am aware that these games have their fair share of cut content and demos, and truthfully, I just don't have that much to say about them that hasn't already been said in general terms during my covering of the 4 junior adventure franchises. The demos in particular aren't very interesting, seeing as the Big Thinkers ones are just mini-games from the actual game, while Blue's birthday demo is the Farm Skidoo area completely unchanged. The cut content of these titles can mostly be found on the cutting room floor as always, so I highly suggest you check out that website if you are in any way curious about it. Ultimately, while none of these games particularly strike me in such a way that the adventure games do, I'm still grateful to have experienced all of them, most for the very first time, because I think there are a lot of interesting games here regardless of whether or not I think they are good. I don't see myself ever going back to play any of these games, but that's just me. I'm sure they have their fans in various areas, and I encourage said fans to continue to enjoy them. With that said, however, next up comes the biggest Humongous Entertainment franchise, well, by a landslide, the junior sports game, starting with the original Backyard Baseball released in 1997. Covering these games is going to be no small feat, given just how many there are, but it should be interesting to see how I'm going to tackle this nonetheless. I hope you're looking forward to it, and until next time, Shadowstreak, signing off.